Hey, teachers and parents. So I'm so excited because in this episode, we are talking to Masha Freydlin, a second language English teacher who mentors new teachers and works with leaders in education through a framework called Reflection in Action, which I can't wait to talk to her about. So, Masha, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I am really great. I'm so excited to be here. I love the idea of talking about education to teachers and parents, frankly, anybody who listen. It's
Yeah.
my passion. And so I just think that the more folks who are talking about it and listening to it and having conversations, the better it is. So I'm excited on this Saturday morning.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Me too. Thank you for joining me. So tell us like how exactly did your teaching journey begin?
I took a circuitous road to teaching. I did not go to college to become a teacher. I actually majored in costume design and Russian literature. But teaching was something that I always did in high school. I used to tutor. My family is full of educators, and it was just something that I naturally was inclined to do. I loved it, but I didn't really consider it as a career path in terms of going to school for it. And so when I graduated and I came back to New York City, sort of at not at a loss necessarily, but right after college, trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And I had come to New York City when I was 7, and I didn't speak English. And so one of the things I was really thinking about was how do I give back to my community that I felt gave me a lot? And so I wanted to become a teacher in specifically in the areas where I went to school because I
Okay.
felt like I had an understanding of the population, of the challenges in the neighborhood where I grew up, and I thought that it would be sort of a perhaps ironically a smoother transition. I was wrong, and that's okay. But so I actually became a New York City Teaching Fellow, which is an alternate certification program. So
Oh, okay.
you interview for the job, and then when you get hired, you basically get your master's simultaneously as teaching full time.
Is that a
Uh,
standard thing with that position that you would get your master's at the same time?
so that was a specific program that I did. There
Okay.
are
That's
many
that's
different
great.
types of alternate certifications. And specifically in the United States right now, there's so many areas with teacher shortages. So
Right.
it can look vastly different. And so I think that that's one of the most important things to keep in mind of how people come to education, how people come into the classroom. They're not, it isn't just the standard path of, okay, I went to high school, went to college, I majored in education, and now I'm
Yeah.
in the classroom teaching this thing that I've been studying for a long time. And I will say this, that yes, the first 2 years were extraordinarily difficult. The learning curve was incredibly steep. That being said, it was by far one of the most rewarding times of my life. And I'm a learner where I prefer the steep learning curve. It keeps me engaged and challenged. And so for me, it really worked. Um,
Were
I
you
learned a lot of
teaching like
lessons.
sorry, were you teaching
Yeah.
different grades, or were you specifically teaching like specific grades that just happened to deal with a lot of second language learners? Because that's how you were, right? It was second language learners. So you were
Right.
working with a lot of those students.
Yeah, so my first job was actually the first job interview I had was actually very full circle. It was with one of my
Okay.
former assistant principals when I was in middle school. So that was like a moment of like, oh wow, okay. But actually, my first job I got hired at a high school to teach summer
Okay.
school, and I was working with a mentor teacher. And I was 22 years old, and my students were basically 18 and 19. And
Wow.
it was challenging because it's summer school, which means that kids have already taken this class, so they may not have passed the class, or they might be needing to take it for graduation for other requirements.
Right.
And so it was definitely, it was a lot. But I had 3 classes. There were over 90 kids on the rosters, and I didn't understand how that was going to work. And they told me, they're like, oh, no, no, only half the kids show up anyway. Like, you'll be fine.
Okay.
And so, but at the end of that summer, I got accessed. In New York City, we have this, I guess it's part of the system of where if the need in the school for the amount of teachers like, goes down, for example, you don't lose your job. It's what's called you get access. So you're still in the system, and they can send
Okay.
you to other schools to teach in your content area. And
Okay.
so I got a job. I went on a bunch of interviews that September, and I got a job at an elementary school, and it was an elementary school in the region where I went to school. And so I was really excited and I was really happy. I was going to be working with students in grades kindergarten through fifth grade, and I was
Okay.
doing a push in and pull out model. So it means I was going partnering with other teachers, going into their classes, and then taking out students into my own room to do explicit instruction in English, and then sort of align it to the topics that they were studying in class. And I taught that first year. I think I had over 110 students on my roster, and it was a whirlwind.
Wow.
Our school had like 1,200 kids in it. Um, Again, one of the most incredibly rewarding experiences, but I learned so much. Fell on my face a bunch of times, trying different things, and that was okay. And that was okay.
I'm curious. So you mentioned you had a mentor at your first school. Did you have a mentor at this school with this situation as well?
So I've been incredibly lucky. I've had quite a few mentors along the way. And so through that original Teaching Fellows program, they had given us mentors to sort of guide us through this process of onboarding into schools. And I remember just before I got into the classroom, sort of having that aha moment of I don't actually know what I'm doing. And
Yeah.
I went to speak to one of the mentors there, and I remember her name was Virginia, and she had been teaching for, I want to say, I don't know, 45 years.
Okay.
She had already retired, and this was her mentoring new teachers was what she did. And I remember asking her, I think it was probably the end of June, right before I went into the classroom, and I was like, okay, so I'm going to go into the classroom. What do I do? Like, I mean, outside of, you go into class and you're supposed to teach.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
and she gave
There's
me
more
two
to it,
pieces.
I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. She gave me two pieces of advice that have stayed with me for now. I'm finishing out my 17th year of teaching, and it's advice that I pass on to any teachers that I mentor, which is the first thing she said, care about the kids. It was, if nothing else, have them feel that you deeply care about them, and everything else will fall into place because they'll at least come away from your classroom with the knowledge that they matter, that somebody thinks that they're
Mm,
important, that they're cared for. That's not something that is small. That's
yeah,
actually like a really huge thing. Yes, we want to make sure they know the content and that they are, progressing in their academic studies. But if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, the first need is to feel safety, physical,
yeah.
emotional safety. And that is a feeling that is priceless
Yeah,
for
I had
kids.
another lady I interviewed, training to be a
Mm,
principal, who's Maslow before Bloom. That was her go-to, was like Maslow before Bloom.
yeah.
She's like, you have to make them feel safe and like you want them to be there if in order to gain respect, to gain the learning. And I mean, I know that's difficult with a lot of kids out there today, but you gotta just do your absolute best to do that, I think.
It is, but I also think that there are really small, simple ways that you can
Okay.
do it. And it could be something as simple as when a kiddo comes late to your class, instead of berating them for being late, you simply tell them, I'm so glad you're here today.
Yeah, I love
It
that.
doesn't take more than that. Um, and reminding them that you know they can be successful, that like you're there to support them, not punish them, if they mess up in some way, because kids are going to mess up. We as adults mess up. Being real about that makes them feel cared for, and they'll come back to you. And it's important to do that. It really is, because there's this amazing educator. She's unfortunately no longer with us, Rita Pearson. She had a TED Talk. If anybody ever wants to look that up, she has a great TED Talk called "Every Kid Needs a Champion," or "Every Child Needs a Champion."
Okay.
In it, she talks about like kids don't learn from educators they don't like. And a lot of educators bristle at that. They're like, well, I'm not here to be liked. And it isn't about that. It's not whether they like what outfit you're wearing or that you're their best friend. It's, do they feel that you care about them?
Yeah.
If they feel you care about them, they will learn from you. And so that was a piece of advice that changed my entire pedagogy and how I show up in classrooms. And so I genuinely hope that that's something that resonates with teachers, and it's something that they at least start to think about. And the second piece of advice that she gave me, also incredibly salient, and has withstood the test of time, which is that every child is a special needs child. You just don't know what their
Mm.
special need is. And like when you sit in for a minute and think about like how true that is, because it's true for every person. We
Mm.
all have needs. Behavior is just communication. So if you have kids melting down, if something's going on, they're communicating to you that
Hmm.
something is not right. And so how we take the time to respond to that, um, even though we are also human, and I think it's really important to hold space for that. Sometimes when a kiddo is being entirely disrespectful, you know, inside your head, you want to respond in a very real world way. And
Yes.
as an educator, unless you really built up that relationship where that child truly knows that you care about them, you really have to think about how real is your response. You should always be authentic, but taking the time to create those bridges when something is going wrong is gonna pay huge dividends, as
Right.
opposed to leading into your initial gut response, where I've heard a lot of teachers say, well, if you need to earn my respect, or you're
Mm.
not respecting me. And we also have to recognize that there's a power dynamic in the classroom. Like, as a teacher, you hold power in that classroom. Yes, should kids respect you? Of course, everybody should respect each other. But we also know that when we're using the word should, that means it's not always happening.
Yeah.
How do we get them from the place of where we are in our current reality, whatever's happening in your classroom, to where you want them to be? More often than not, it isn't your first gut response of just engaging in a verbal
Like
back and
tug of
forth.
war or
Yeah, tug
something.
of war.
Yeah,
The minute you
exactly.
engage, the minute you engage with a student in a tug of war, you lost. Like, just walk away. It's
Yeah.
not worth it. It's not worth it for your teaching, for that relationship, for anything that's going to happen in your classroom. We all do it. Like, on occasion, you get tired. Things are happening in your lives too. And I think that that's one of the most important things to remember as a teacher. You are human. You don't stop being human because you walk into a classroom.
Yeah. Have you tried any other, like if I were a new teacher coming to you, would there be something else you might tell me about how what's worked for you with building relationships with the kids?
Yeah.
Like for
Yeah.
me, I know it was like if the girls would come in at break time or something, you make that time to talk to them. And I know you also have to set boundaries for yourself, but just maybe saying, I see you. Now might not be a good time, but maybe I still want to talk to you, maybe this time or something like that. I don't know. What have you done that's you found has worked?
So there's a couple of things, and it's interesting. I do like a group class on this. So
Okay.
I call it human-centered classroom management. And the idea is that it's the person at the center of all of it. So some easy things to do, again, in line with the idea that we too have to set boundaries for ourselves, is I have with technology, this part is super easy. I have a Google form. Again, happy to share it with anybody. I can link it for you.
Yeah,
And you
definitely.
can I have it for younger grades and older grades. It's very simple. It's a check-in form, and it's just like it gives them a mood meter. It's like, how are you feeling right now? You can tell me as little or as much as you want. And then it asks what I think is the most important question, which is, how do you want to be supported right now? And then it gives them a
Ah,
bunch of
yeah,
options.
genius.
It's like, do you need to talk immediately? Like, is this super urgent? Do you just need to vent? I have kids who fill out this form, and I get them, you get the timestamp for when it's filled out.
Yeah.
Kids filling this out at 3 in the morning, and then they just click, I just need to vent. The fact that like they trust that there's somebody listening to them at 3 in the morning. Well, listen, I'm asleep at 3 in the morning. I'm not checking them at three
Yeah,
in the
I should checking the phone. That's
right.
brilliant idea though. I love that. Please,
But
please
yeah,
send us that link for sure.
absolutely. But the thing is that they know. So I set expectations and I tell them, you guys, every morning at 8 a.m., I check this form. It takes me 2 minutes to check it. It's not that big a deal. So they know when I'm going to check it. And if every day doesn't work for you, you could say, hey guys, I check this twice a week, or I check it once a week. This is the time
Yeah.
I'm going to check it. This way you're gauging their expectations. Some of the other things on the form are like, I need to talk to a guidance counselor, or I need a resource, or I'd like to read more about this, or can you organize a conversation with my parents? That's one that like I added on because a student asked me to do that. So that's the other
Wow.
piece.
It's amazing.
In terms of
I
working
wish
with
I'd had
students,
that
yeah,
advice when I was teaching grade 7. Oh my gosh, that would have been so valuable.
they have, and the other part, and this is the really great part, when we speak, things get lost.
Yeah.
When they write it down, in a Google form, you can go back to what they said in their
Yeah.
own words. It's there for you. That's like super,
Exactly.
super easy to do. And this is the rule that I live by, and it was hard to get there, but do not ever say you don't care. In the presence of children, do not ever say that you don't care.
Yeah.
There are
That's
going to be
powerful.
times when that's the only thing in your head where you're like, well, I can't care more than you do. I hear this all the time where, like, kids are testing boundaries. They might have stuff going on. They're not doing the work. They're not showing up. They're, the plethora of things that happen in a classroom. And you just want to be like, well, why am I working harder than you? Why do I want this more than you? And I had a
Mm.
student who taught me this because I was ripping out my hair. I didn't know how to reach a student. I thought I had tried everything. I didn't. So I went to talk to another teacher who I know he had a good relationship with. And I was like, how do I reach this child? I was like, I understand that I'm not the answer to every kid. I think that's
Right.
also important to know.
That is
You're not going to be the
important.
answer to every child, and that's okay. Can you help them find somebody who is? Um, and so I spoke to this teacher and I was like, he seems to show up in your class. Like he seems to be responsive. What are you doing? What can I do that you're doing? And she told me, she's like, he really just needs to feel sometimes that nobody's going to give up on him. And so I was like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I incorporate that in my classroom with him? And so every time he would, melt down or put his head down and say, I'm not doing this work. No, kind of doing the thing that seventh and eighth graders do.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I would be like, oh my goodness, this is really frustrating. Like, I'm not going to make you do this. Like, you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
Every time I would think that, I would train myself to say, that's okay. You don't have to care right now. I'm going to care for you until you're ready to do this. And I trained myself. I practiced it
Yeah. Yeah.
and at
Amazing.
first it was hard. It really was. Because, like, you're thinking one thing and you're saying something else. And you're kind of like, am I not being authentic? Am I not being true to myself? Like, are they going to get it? Because kids have a sixth sense. They know
Yeah.
when.
Yep.
But what I found is that the more I said it, the more I believed it. And the more I recognized that that was actually how I was going to get through to him. And I'd love to tell you that at the end of the year, it was all perfect. It wasn't, but he did make strides. And last year, he was in high school now. He reached out for a recommendation for going to college. So I consider that a win.
That is a
We never
win.
know what's going to stick with a student. So I often think about it in the same way, how medical professionals take an oath of, like, do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that way in teaching as well. And I talk about this to new teachers a lot. I go, you're not going to have the right answer for everything. You're not. That's impossible. Always think about what's in the best interest of the student. And also, how do we do less harm? If we can't get them to where we want them to be, how do we at least make sure that we are not hurting them in any way?
Right. And I think that's especially important with grades like 7, 8, and 9, because sometimes you get a lot of teachers that feel, well, they must just, come in and be disciplined and do the work. And, I'm going to teach them that. So I'm going to sit here and just, tell them to copy off the board like it was when I was in grade 7,
Mhm.
back when
Yeah.
there was no technology and all that. And I think we underestimate that it's not just little kids that need that care and that respect and love. Like, it really is love. You don't have to say, I love you, but it's in the things that you do. And, just for them to know that you are sincere, that you want them to do well, and that sort of thing. So I think that is definitely so valuable. And I love that you said, with your mentor helping you to come to a lot of these conclusions and you going to another teacher to help you, because this is exactly why I wanted that. I'm into mindset coaching for teachers, right? Well, I've delved in,
Yeah.
like, gone this direction because not everybody has that mentor. Not everybody has that safe space, especially a lot of new teachers. And I want to give them that, just that opportunity to say, okay, what do you need? Like, where's the issue, and let's work through it. Because it is so, as we can see from what you said, right? It was a game changer having those people in your
Yeah.
life.
You can't do it alone. I think that that's one of the other things that we think about. Like, as a new teacher, you want to go in, and so many new teachers have this idea of, like, I got to be perfect. I got to know everything, and I just got to do this. And I'm always like, especially whenever I have a group of new teachers and I'm talking to them, I'm like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're gonna have incredible days where you're like on cloud nine. You're like, oh my God, this was amazing. This is why I do this. And you're gonna have days where you're like, I should have just stayed in bed today. Like, it would
Yeah.
have been better if I didn't show up to work. those are both days that are going to happen to you. They're okay. They're how you're going to figure out who you are as a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what like my reflection and action framework is about. It starts with us. Like, do you know yourself? Do you know what your values are? So many teachers get frustrated and burned out because they feel like they're working against the grain, they're working against the system. And so oftentimes when I do coaching around that, I ask them, I'm like, well, let's start with you. What do you value? What do you believe in above all else? Forget your classroom management, forget all what content you're teaching for a second. Like, as a human being,
Yeah.
what do you believe in and value? Then I asked the question, I was like, how does that show up in your classroom? Like, where do you have that in your classroom? Because if you're not living in your values, if you're not aligning what you do all day long to what you believe in, it is going to be incredibly frustrating. You're going to burn out super quick because you're constantly working against yourself.
Yeah.
And so we do this exercise, I call it the guiding beliefs exercise. And so I go, if I believe, and I'll give you an example, if I believe that all students can learn, then I will. And then you can do that for every student. You can do that for every class. You could do it for a particular student who's giving you a hard time and isolating them and saying like, okay, so Joe has not submitted homework in 6.5 months. And Joe's parents are not necessarily supportive of me reaching out. Okay, but I do believe Joe can learn. So if I believe Joe can learn, what can I do? What can I do in the classroom? What can I do in terms of support? When you start thinking about it that way, where those things become actionable, and all of a sudden it's far less frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. So this actually leads me into like you actually went back to school to work to become a mental health expert and subsequently a guidance counselor. So did that take you in a different direction with teaching, or how does that work with what you're doing now?
So I think that one of the greatest misconceptions about teaching is that it's all about content. That we get a group of students who come into a classroom and we just deliver content to them. If that was the case, students would be sitting at home on a computer and that would be the end of it. We have the technology to do it.
Yeah.
Teachers have to be content matter experts and they have to be people matter experts because we teach content to people and the people are the more important part in that equation. And so I think that when I went to become a mental health counselor and a guidance counselor, the reason I did it was I had taught for 3 years in a neighborhood that was very close to where I grew up, again, with that idea of like, oh, I understand these kids' experiences. Like, this is great, all this stuff. And I was like, I'm not equipped. I'm not equipped to give them what they need because my kiddos were struggling with life things, with family things, with violence and poverty and lots of things. And I was just kind of like, I'm sitting here telling a kid that chapter 6 was really important and why didn't he do it? And he's worried about a situation at home where his mom might not be safe.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden going back to that Maslow and Bloom piece of like, okay, how can I expect him to read this when his mind is elsewhere, and rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
And so when I went back, it was to school. And again, I was extraordinarily privileged that I was able to do that. And I say that because I think that when I talk to teachers about it, they go like, well, I can't afford to not get paid at my job and go study. I want to say there are many, many resources. Degrees cost money. Education is free. And it's incredibly important to know that. And I always give out tons of resources for that. All the Ivy League schools in the States have free courses you could take. So if you're seeing something in your pedagogy that you feel is like, oh, this is an area where I feel like I need more, seek out professional development. Not the professional development that districts mandate that you go to every whatever 2 months or every Monday or whatever. That those professional developments align with district priorities. They're important for that district. But what's important to you? What are you feeling in your classroom that you need? And so I really felt that like I needed to know how to handle these situations, how to actually support my students in this. And so I took an academic sabbatical and I went and I studied. And for me, it was both a life-saving and a life-changing experience for me personally as a human being. It took me, I always did well in school. I didn't always like school, but like school came fairly easily to me.
Yeah.
And so I was used to it. I was like, okay, if I just study, Like, I'm going to
Yeah,
do
it'll
well.
just happen. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
no problem, right? And I think it was like Bill Gates who said like success is a terrible teacher. And I figured that out when I was doing because I was like, oh, they would ask me things like, how are you feeling about something? And I would tell them, they're like, no, that's not a feeling. And I was like, well, what do you mean? They're like, no, that's what you think about a feeling. And it took me like 6 months to figure out like how to parse that out. And when
Wow.
I did, that was probably the most impactful thing in my entire career journey, like teaching journey, because I figured out that how we think about feelings and how we experience feelings are two different ways. And oftentimes, how we think about it is us distancing ourselves from our emotions and what we're thinking. And it's the same for what we're feeling, and it's the same for our students. And
Right.
so, while I did my internship year actually at my high school because I thought it was incredibly important. And then I went back into the classroom. And to this day, I will tell you that it is the most valuable education that I have received because it taught me how to
Well,
human better and messier.
yeah, and I just think it's not something that we were taught in teachers college, right? Because the mental, especially the mental health side of things, that it's become so prevalent and so much more of an, difficulty with so many people to take that, to learn about that will establish you as more of an expert in the classroom to spot things with your students that you would not have spotted before because you didn't have that training. And also, I would say to new teachers or teachers who are like, well, I can't afford it, start your morning with a YouTube video on
Yes.
on empathy, on what to look for
Hmm.
on a simple mental health topic. Like, start to feed yours, or as I like to say, start watering the seeds in the
Yeah.
mind that are growing the flowers, right? Like, so that
Talk
you're,
to people.
yeah, talk to
Talk to
people.
people. That is the
Yeah.
when you originally asked me that question, like where did I find my mentor? And I thought about it, and I was like, okay, there were mentors that were given to me or assigned to me, but the true mentors, like the mentors that have just created this incredible impact long term on my pedagogy, um, have just been people educators that I've come in contact with throughout the years, asking questions. Where I was like, hey, I don't know this. Could somebody like tell me about it? Or like, what's your experience? What do you do in your classroom? What's a story that you have to share? Storytelling is so powerful.
Mhm.
That's how we learn. And so I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, Mush, just to reiterate, like what you're saying is so valuable because I did an interview recently with a woman who she felt this powerful urge, and she's in Australia, but her goal is to eradicate gossip, which I just think is
Wow. That's
fascinating. I mean,
I would love like
right?
how much would we like wow. Yes.
Yeah. And what you just said reminded me of that because so many teachers go to another teacher to gossip about something that happened, whereas you could actually be taking that time to say, what's your strength? What are you really good at?
Mhm.
Like, how do you do it? What do you do? Like, let me learn something from you. Or, like, what's your best tip for teaching writing? Or what's your best tip for math? Or, something you could change that narrative about yourself, right? And instead of making it toxic, go and use that time wisely to learn something from someone else. Totally free.
Totally, absolutely. And also so deeply enriching because here's
Yeah.
the other piece of it. Through those conversations, you're going to build connections and relationships. And there is nothing more important in the teaching space than knowing there are people who have your back. Because this is not like there are going to be those days when you just want to shut the door and be like, I need to vent to somebody who's going to get it and it isn't going to become this gossip mill.
Yes.
And through those conversations where you build those relationships, you get people like that in your life, and
Yeah.
it is invaluable. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in learning more about her research and how she's doing that
Oh, I
because,
can't wait to drop that interview.
yeah,
It was amazing. It was
so
amazing.
cool. So
Yeah, so
cool.
cool. So that would definitely be one piece of advice I'm sure both of us would give new teachers
Mhm.
starting out. Can you think of another piece of advice that you would give new teachers today starting out?
Yeah. Don't try to do it all. And what I mean is there's always going to be more to do. the to-do list in teaching doesn't have a back end. It keeps going. And it's because you work with people. And so figuring out how to prioritize, figuring out what your strengths are, leaning into those and leveraging those, I think is really important. Recognizing that there are going to be things like, what are your non-negotiables? If you can figure out what your non-negotiables are to feel good in the class, that's where you start, and it will look vastly different for every teacher. I know teachers who are like, listen, I need to be perfectly planned to feel good.
Right.
I have other teachers who are like, you know what? I need to have an idea of what's happening, but I need to have 10 hours of sleep. Like if I have 10 hours of sleep, I can go into that classroom and knock it out of the park. I know this content, no problem. It doesn't matter where you are, but figuring out what it is that you need to be successful and then giving yourself grace.
Yes.
Because if you don't, so oftentimes we're our own harshest critics. And I think it's really, and this comes like from the mental health space as well, but retraining that inner voice to be kinder to yourself
Yeah.
will go a long way.
Yeah.
Ask yourself the question, are you trying? If you're trying, then you do great. That idea, like, are you caring about your kids? Have you let them know? Okay, you're trying.
Yeah.
It's going to get better.
Yeah. No, definitely. I love that. That's fantastic. Fantastic advice. And with all the kind of things that are going on with education, like what are your thoughts on the future of education? Do you think it's going to change much, or do you think yeah, I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
So when the pandemic really hit in 2020, which is 4 years, actually March in the United
Yeah.
States, it was
Same
crazy.
here.
And it was a harrowing time for so many people. But I also saw it as an opportunity for us to learn lessons and be creative and be flexible in education, which we don't often get to do.
Mhm.
And I felt we dropped the ball when we came back and we just went to business as usual. We started incorporating more
Right.
technology, but outside of that, it was sort of business as usual. And if anybody's ever read or listened to Ken Robinson's work around the development of education and how that came about, I think I had a professor who said it once so eloquently, and so I'm going to just paraphrase what he said, which was, we used to teach and try to prepare students for jobs that existed. We
Mhm.
are now in the process of preparing our students for jobs that don't yet exist,
Mhm.
and we don't know what they are. And I think that it's incredibly important that our education system finds a way to be flexible enough to understand that, embrace it, and shift how we're doing things. Because if we don't make education about the people, we're going to lose out. Because education is a place of possibility. It
Yeah.
needs to be. Otherwise, there's little purpose for it, honestly. Like to me, I see education as a place from where we are. It's that bridge from where we are to where we can be. And
Right.
so taking in all of the advancement in technology that now has given us so many options, and recognizing that there's a human element that technology cannot replicate. That
Definitely.
feeling of safety that we talk about, that feeling of how
The
does a person
empathy.
see the empathy, those things. How do we find a way to bring that all together into a mosaic that actually works? So, do I have an idea of exactly what it'll look like? No, but I have hopes. I have hopes
Yeah.
that we are going to look at teacher preparation programs and say, hey, you know what? One class in child development
Yeah.
isn't going to cut it
Or
for when
mental
you
health,
or mental
right?
health or when you go into the classroom. And even for your own mental health, like how powerful would it be if teacher preparation programs insisted that you take a class on how to take care of yourself? Because that
Yes.
idea, like during the pandemic, it became all about self-care. And it was like, okay, but I don't have time to go get a manicure because I have a list of 9,000 things to do. So
Yeah.
now we're just adding that to my to-do list. That doesn't work. Like we need to be taught how to do those things.
Yeah.
And so I think it maybe starts there.
Yeah, that's great. Like, and setting boundaries, you need to give
Yeah,
teachers the strategies, the wording, the vocabulary in order to be able to say, okay, I would be happy to do that, but what else, what would you like me to not do in order
yeah,
to do that? Because I won't be able to fit, both things in.
100%.
Yeah. So I
Recognizing, I
definitely,
think,
yeah.
recognizing the needs of education have changed, I think that that's where it has to start. If we recognize that the needs have
Yes,
changed, then we
agreed.
have to recognize that the preparation also has to
Yes.
change and the expectations have to change. So I guess that question would be, if we believe teachers can be impactful in the classroom, what are we doing? Like, what do they need? And I think if we start by asking that question, then we'll push education into a better place. Because I
Yeah.
think that a teacher in crisis is students in crisis.
Yes. Absolutely. I could not have said it better. That's a brilliant, 100%. A teacher in crisis is students in crisis. Absolutely. And if we don't do something, it's just going to get worse. And nobody wants a country full of students in crisis, right? So,
Which many of us have right now. And it's for
yeah,
many, many reasons.
yeah,
But are we ignoring it and treating it the way we would have treated it 20 years ago? Or are we asking questions that maybe can push our thinking and help us
yes.
develop something that will meet these needs better for all the people involved?
Exactly. And you can't say you don't have ideas. I mean, there are so many places out there in the world that are pushing the boundaries of education in different ways that are working with students. Now, what, so the resources are there.
Yeah,
It's just a matter of getting a team together and doing something about it.
I think it's a matter of making it a priority.
Yeah.
Because when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And right now it feels like oftentimes in education, everything is a priority. And so I guess that question becomes, how do we narrow that down? How do we say, this is what's really important right now? Let's focus on it and let's recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. Shifts don't happen overnight. Paradigm shifts take time. But with that being said, if we don't think it's important, it'll never happen.
Yes. Yeah, we have to prioritize it and put it as like you want to educate your children because they're the future of what's going to run your country, right?
Absolutely.
So, and the teachers are such an integral part of that. So I think it's important to sit down also with the teachers themselves, and do something about it. No, that's great. That's a good, excellent point. So where is the best place, Masha, to find you online if people want to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually during the pandemic, I started an educator group called the Teachers Lounge. And the reason for it was because I wanted to create a safe space for teachers to ask questions there was a lot of negativity because when people are feeling overwhelmed, they tend to vent. And online is a great place to vent. And people become keyboard warriors and it gets sidetracked. And so for me, this space was meant to be a place where we have questions, we talk to each other, we share resources, we ask questions and answer questions and kind of just figure it out as we go along. And so we have about 2,000 folks in there. It's a very fluid space.
Yeah.
And so that you can certainly find me there. I'm on IG at The Perceptive Teacher.
Cool.
And that's
Put
sort of
that
my
down.
handle everywhere. So if you want to contact me, you can reach out at theperceptiveteacher@gmail.com
Nice.
or check out my website at www.theperceptiveteacher.com. So
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I love the teacher's lunch. I love that idea. And I see you've got a few books here, so you're obviously a reader.
I am.
So lay it on us. What are the
Okay.
recommendations?
So I think the first is an article, and I think this is incredibly important for all
Cool.
teachers to read, but specifically new teachers. And it's called it's from The Cult of Pedagogy by Jennifer Gonzalez, and it's called Find Your Marigold: The One Essential Rule for New Teachers. This is an article that was written in 2013. I share it with every single teacher that I come across.
Thank you.
It's take 10 minutes out of your life, you will be better for it.
I will.
The other pieces are for those hard days where you just need to relate to somebody and realize that whatever kookiness is happening in your teaching space, you are not alone. It's a collection of stories from educators called Today I Made a Difference. And sometimes you make a difference for the better, and sometimes not so much, and that's okay. And that's by Joseph Underwood.
Brilliant.
Then if you are more into thinking about how do students learn? What does it mean to be community and culturally responsive to the students in front of you? Zaretta Hammond has an incredible book. It's kind of hefty. So I use it as a resource more than anything else. And I go back
Okay.
to it. It's called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And it breaks it down into just how we teach align with how our brains function.
Okay.
So if you are interested in
Fantastic.
something like that, that's a good one. And then there's sort of that Google form that I was telling you about. It's
Mm-hmm.
called the I Wish My Teacher Knew form. And so there's a great book called I Wish My Teacher Knew. It's by Kyle Schwartz. And it talks about what is it, like, how do you get to know your students well? What is it that if your kids had the chance to tell you about themselves, what would they tell you? I
Right.
promise you it won't be about the last assignment and it won't be about whatever book you made them read. It isn't. Not because what you're doing isn't important, but that's not what they want you to know about themselves.
Yeah.
And that could be so powerful
Yeah.
in building those relationships. And then finally,
Love it.
one of my favorite books is Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice
Oh,
Sendak. And I
brilliant.
recommend that everybody owns a copy
Yes.
because it is such, yes, it's a kid's book, and I read it to my students. I also read it to high school students and I read it to college students because what it's really about is your internal world and how you deal with challenges, and that sometimes you want to run away from them. And we all experience that, and we all experience the world in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
And this is such a great way in a kid's book that you get to see it. Um, and finally, one of the most impactful things that I've ever done is ask my students for book recommendations.
That's a
Um,
great idea.
it's game changing because reading, not everyone's a reader, and that's okay. But we've got audiobooks now, and you can watch like video versions of it. Ask your
Mm-hmm.
kids for recommendations. You're going to know what they're into. You're going to know what's resonating with them. You're going to be able to get a little bit of a snippet of what their world looks like and what's important to them. And
Yeah.
that's invaluable information.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. It's such a great idea. And so like I can see you've got such amazing energy, Masha. So how do you move yourself from a negative mindset into a positive mindset? What are your strategies there? Your
So,
practices?
nothing, the really good lessons in life never come easily. And so I wish they did, but I was sick for a really long time. I had a double transplant 5 years ago. And
Okay.
for me, teaching became the thing I got to do, not that I had to do. And all the things that associated with it, I get to do. And so when I think about how do I move from that place of like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to, like, we have that mindset about anything. Like you have to go to the gym after a really long day and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
how do I drag myself there? Right? Asking yourself the question, how do I turn this from I have to do this to I get to do this?
Yes.
And all of a sudden you're like,
Incredible.
oh, okay. Like, hey, I get to do this thing. That's a really cool thing. And you kind of
That's a
train your
great
brain to do
mindset
that.
shift for sure. I get to do this, right? Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, when you don't get to do it, then you realize how
Mhm.
fantastic it was that you actually did get to do
Yeah.
it, right? So it
Hmm.
does completely shift your mindset. So like, almost helps the growth mindset as well. I love that. Thank you. And what is one piece of advice you would give to yourself as a first year teacher? I know you've given us a little bit of advice
Yeah.
with other first year teachers, but what about you?
I think it goes back to that piece with giving yourself grace and recognizing you're not the answer to everyone's problem.
Okay, nice.
Um, because I think that when we're in that helping profession, in any helping profession, you kind of go into it that is that, oh, I want to help. I want to
Yes.
support. I want to do these things. Recognizing your own limitations. I wish I had that understanding as a first year teacher, recognizing that because I couldn't didn't make me a failure as a teacher.
Right,
Uh,
right, exactly. I love that. That is so true. And what three things are you grateful for today?
Oh my goodness. I love gratitude lists actually. So I am deeply grateful for my family, who have always inspired me and supported me, and challenged me. Sometimes for the better and sometimes not. But um I am deeply grateful for my community of students and teachers who I learn from every day. I cannot emphasize how grateful I am for the lessons my students teach me.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
love
three,
that.
I'm deeply grateful for being able to do what I do. I recognize how much of a privilege it is to be able to work in something you love. And that's probably the one piece of advice that I consistently give to all educators, no matter what point of your education journey you're on. Find a way to fall in love at least a little bit with what you're doing, because otherwise the hard pieces become a little too hard.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm just like so grateful for you coming on the show today, Masha, because you're exactly the type of person I want to have on my podcast and my channel, because you're showing educators that yes, there is negativity surrounded about teachers, but you don't have to be in that situation, right? You can choose differently for yourself. And I just really appreciate all the value that you like gave us today about your strategies and how you do that. And it was incredibly powerful for me. I wish I'd met you like 20 years ago when I started, like, well, 23 years ago now. And like, and yeah, and I just wish you so much happiness and success and prosperity with everything that you do as you move forward. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much. And honestly, grateful for the work that you are doing. I think it's so deeply important. And I listen, if I could replicate you in your podcast and have one in every state, I think we would be all in a better place in education. So thank you. Thank you for doing the work.